Good evening, welcome to the August 28th update on the tropics. As always, these thoughts are mine alone, and in making decisions regarding Nora and Ida, please refer to the National Hurricane Center, your local weather office, and your local government for all the latest information pertaining to you, and if there are evacuation orders issued for your area, please heed them. This is very serious. We're going to start with Nora here, located in the eastern Pacific here, that has just made landfall on southwestern Mexico and is now coming off the coast, and it has apparently taken some damage along the track that it has taken here. And you can see that the eye feature that was present earlier today, see that making landfall here, is no longer as well defined, and that is due to the fact that the storm has interacted with mountains and the circulation has been pretty disrupted here, and the very large circulation that we are now dealing with is still going to be taking some time to restructure here. And time it does have, but it also may not have that time. It's a very tight forecast here, as it is going to be tracking practically right along the Mexican coast here as it advances off to the northwest into the Gulf of California here. If we look at the NHC forecast here, you can see now that hurricane warnings have been issued for the entire part of the southwestern Mexican coastline here, and hurricane watches are in effect for the areas that are within the day 3 time frame of the forecast here, and those will turn into warnings, but it ultimately depends on whether or not the track wiggles onshore or not. There is still a pretty big area in terms of the difference of track and difference of intensity resulting from this difference of track that is present right now. And so you have hurricane warnings that are in effect regardless, but it may be able to come ashore here and would weaken and probably eliminate hurricane warnings up the coast if it were to come ashore here once again, as the system would weaken, as the mountains of Mexico are very disruptive to hurricanes and often result in quick weakening here. But as far as the southwestern coast of Mexico here is concerned, you do need to be prepared and ready for a pretty significant hurricane. This is not expected to become a major hurricane like Ida is, but this is still a very large system here. You can see the tropical storm force wind field is rather expansive, and the hurricane wind field is somewhat large in its own right here. And so this is going to be bringing a lot of water along the coast, and storm surge is definitely an issue, and hurricane winds are an issue. You can see the current intensity is assessed at 80 miles per hour. It may weaken because of the land interaction here, as the circulation may have been a little tilted by the mountain interaction here. But regardless of that, the system will likely recover, as the waters that are in this region are rather favorable for continued reorganization and maybe some strengthening here, and the overall environment, if we go back to the true color loop, is still very favorable. There's not an incoming trough that is going to start shearing the system anytime soon, so it will have a few days to maybe strengthen here as it moves along the Mexican coast, and it really depends on whether or not it comes ashore or not. But regardless, flash flooding, damaging winds, and storm surge are all big threats for the southwestern regions of Mexico here, and even the Baja California Sur here is definitely a region that needs to be watching this, as flash flooding is still a possibility, and tropical storm watches are still in effect for the tip of the Baja California Peninsula here. That is all we're going to be discussing about Nora. We're going to probably continue discussing Nora even after Ida makes landfall here, because it is still a pretty prominent threat, and it does involve the regions of the southwestern United States here, as a lot of rain will be falling, but that is still within the 5-day forecast period, so we still have a little bit of time to be talking about Nora here. It is a rather impressive system. I mean, this is a rather large storm here. If I make a personal comment on this system, this is a very large moisture envelope, and is quite impressive, but still very bad. And if you're in southwestern Mexico, please refer to the National Weather or the Mexican Weather Service here and your local authorities if they do tell you to get out, as this could be serious. And now we talk about our main event here, Hurricane Ida, now in the northeastern Gulf of Mexico here, approaching the most favorable time frame for rapid intensification. It has been struggling a little bit to get to the point of rapid intensification. Now the pressure has dropped a lot, but it is still on the upswing and would need a pretty Herculean effort at this point to get to a higher end strength, but at this point a major hurricane is almost certain here. So it doesn't really matter at this point exactly what the winds are, because the system is rather large and the wind field on the northern side of the system, the side that will be pushing the most surge, is rather expansive. The hurricane wind field is rather large on the northern side. If we look at the IR loop here, you can see that there is bursting convection around a forming eye wall here. The eye wall is complete, but it is not very well balanced here. And if we look at microwave imagery before we go back to the infrared imagery here, you can see that what I'm talking about here with the southern eye wall is not very strong, and the northern eye wall is rather intense here. And you may be seeing evidence now that the system is trying to symmetrize this eye wall, and you're seeing that the eye is temporarily clouding up, and this is due to the fact that the convection is covering it. But underneath these cloud tops that are going over the eye here, the eye is likely warming, and the pressure falls are likely intensifying as the big bursts of convection that are trying to balance this eye wall and symmetrize the eye wall as the system approaches the coast are likely contributing to a faster rate of intensification. We are now at 969 millibars and a maximum sustained winds of 105 miles per hour, and this will likely continue to intensify, perhaps at a faster pace here, as it is now entering the very favorable part of its time. I know the environment has already been rather favorable for the system, but it is now significantly more favorable as the ocean waters here are quite deep and quite warm, and the shelf waters, even though they are shallow here, are rather warm themselves, and the system, given the fact that it is now so far northeast of when it was expected to slow down, the slowdown that we were expecting is now going to happen inland rather than over water. So this will be moving at a rather steady pace towards southeastern Louisiana, and you can see now that the system is rather northeast of the forecast track by the National Hurricane Center here, indicating that southeastern Louisiana and perhaps New Orleans are now under the gun of what would be much worse than what was originally forecast here. And the eye wall is rather expansive. The hurricane wind field is rather expansive, so these hurricane force winds will expand out of the system. And if we do get an eye wall replacement cycle, which if we look at microwave imagery may happen, we do have a secondary band here that is trying to develop. But given the time left over water here, that may be difficult to complete, as we see the eye wall is rather thick here, and this microwave imagery is from about an hour or two ago, and so this eye wall has likely symmetrized at least somewhat here. We're not going to get microwave imagery rather at a frequent rate here, so this is the latest microwave imagery that we can possibly give you. But given the asymmetry of the eye currently and the process that it is currently undergoing here in trying to symmetrize the eye, it will take a bit for an eye wall replacement cycle to commence if an eye wall replacement cycle does try to start. Now on to the impacts of the system. First of all, I would like to highlight the environment that the system is in and the rather expansive outflow that is now over the system. You can see the upper level winds are expanding rather far out of the system. You can see even some outflow over Texas now. And this is indicative of a very favorable environment for the system here. I don't know why the satellite is flashing here, but anyway, the overall environment for the system is continuing to improve and will continue to improve up to landfall. The only kink in the intensification process would be the inner core, and the only kink at landfall that would be the kink in the intensification process and may result in the storm leveling off is a very mild amount of westerly shear that would be over the system at the time of landfall. And given the speed that the system will be coming ashore at, it is very unlikely that this will do anything to the peak intensity of the storm. It may just level off the system rather than weaken it, and it may not even do anything at all, given the fact that this is such a light amount of shear. And if we look at the water vapor imagery, you can see that the core is beginning to symmetrize here, and you can see that the convection overall is beginning to become more symmetric here, and banding is beginning to expand outward, indicating that the system is becoming much more healthy and is likely going to become a rather powerful hurricane at this point. And again, regardless of what exactly the I'm going to switch to the IR imagery here. Oh, Lord. Uh, what exactly happens with the system? Please remember that this is going to be a rather powerful system regardless here. And this is expected to be a major hurricane, and winds in excess of 115 miles per hour are practically guaranteed at this point. If we look at the 3-day cone here, you can see the M's in the track here, both on Sunday morning or Sunday evening or Sunday midday Sunday, excuse me. And this evening here, you can see that the system is already rather powerful and will only continue to strengthen up until landfall. This is already very bad here. You can see that the winds are at 105 miles per hour. If this would make landfall right now, this would still be very, very bad, and it's only going to get worse here. And you can see that the system's wind field here is rather expansive and is going to likely continue to expand up until landfall here as the system continues to intensify. And while the core is still rather small here, and you can see that the hurricane wind field is not too expansive here, the tropical storm winds and 60-mile-per-hour winds that are not mapped out by the National Hurricane Center on the wind field graphic will be still very far from the center, especially on the eastern side of the forecast track here. And as I said, the system is a little bit on the eastern side of the envelope of track possibilities here, so that would mean that the hurricane warnings that are over New Orleans right now would likely warrant a little more significance here. And even though hurricane conditions are already expected for New Orleans, this would likely bring the core a little closer to the city. Not on top of the city just yet. We will cover that in tomorrow morning's video if it does in fact happen, but it may not happen. But do be aware of the little wobbles that could happen as the storm comes closer to landfall here. We can never really get that all the way pinned down to where exactly it will make landfall, but regardless, New Orleans is going to be on the eastern side of this storm's core and will likely be experiencing some of the more significant effects of the system. If we go to the peak surge graphic, as I mentioned before, if it takes a more eastward track, then these higher values would be on the eastern side of the system. And if it takes the more central track, then obviously these values would verify. And if it takes a little bit to the west, then these values would move to the west here. And worse conditions would be farther west and not be affecting New Orleans. But we still do have expected peak values of surge of around 10 to 15 feet and 7 to 11 feet along the southeastern Louisiana coastline here. And this is very significant, and this is a very destructive surge that would likely be occurring here tomorrow. And if you are in a surge zone and you are under a mandatory evacuation, please leave. If you're under a voluntary evacuation, if you are in a surge zone or a possible surge zone here, please leave. And if you are under any type of warning that your local officials have told you about maybe winds being too bad, or flash flooding being too bad, or storm surge flooding being too bad, please leave or be very prepared and make sure that your preparations are complete tonight, because come tomorrow morning, if we look at the most likely graphic of or arrival time of tropical storm force winds, you can see at Sunday 8 a.m. most of the tropical storm force wind field is already ashore, especially in southeastern Louisiana. And I really emphasize this. If you're in southeastern Louisiana, please be gone. This is a very, very surge-prone area, and it is not levied up like the rest of New Orleans or the Mississippi Delta region here. And this area here would likely be taking the brunt of a 10 to 15 foot storm surge. And this is a very destructive surge that would likely be on top of the area by even tomorrow morning. The surge would be rising here, and it's only going to deteriorate as time goes forward here. And you can see that even inland here in Lafayette and the rest of southeastern Louisiana would likely be under tropical storm conditions by early Sunday afternoon. So if you are in evacuation zones and your government is telling you to be prepared or leave, please do heed your local officials and the warnings that they give you, and heed the warnings that your National Weather Service office gives you, as they are more specific and are more pin down on where your exact area and what your exact area will be dealing with. And that is why I say the statement that I say at the beginning of the video. Please refer to the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center for all the latest information pertaining to you. One last thing, we're going to be talking about the rainfall forecast here as this comes ashore. And again, if we do have an eastward track, expect all of this rainfall to translate a bit to the east. As talked about earlier, the mild shear that will be impacting the system out of the west will likely put most of the rainfall on the eastern side of the system. And the tornado threat is also primarily on the eastern side. And one thing that is of note here, if there is a little bit of shear over the system as it does make landfall, and there are bands that are coming off the coast here, and they look like they may be able to produce tornadoes, it is more likely that tornadoes will occur with a system that is sheared out of the west here. And the more shear that is present over these supercellular-like structures here, the more likely there will be tornadoes. And so if you are on the coast or even a little inland here, please be watching for tornadoes and flash flooding, as both of those are pretty significant risks that are outside of the core of the hurricane. And just because the cone may not be over your area does not mean that the effects will not be over your area. You can see this very large spread of 6+ inches of rain. This is half a foot of rain here, all the way to the Alabama border with Florida here, and even a little east of that here in Pensacola. You could be expecting a lot of rain and should be expecting a lot of rain. And even well inland here, you can see this rain is now inland, and these 6-inch totals have been kind of interspersed throughout Mississippi here. And if you're in Mississippi or even western Alabama, please do be watching your local National Weather Service office. Have your weather radio ready for either tornado warnings or flash flood warnings here, and be very safe driving and pay attention to your local National Weather Service. We cannot emphasize enough how important each warning that the National Weather Service or National Hurricane Center gives you is, and please do be taking them very seriously, as the system will be rather strong and will have widespread impacts well away from the core of the system. That is all we have for now. We'll be back with another update probably tomorrow morning regarding Ida, perhaps around sunrise. Don't know. But please be safe and take this very seriously. This is about as bad as it gets for this region. And I know it's unfortunate because we've had so many systems impact Louisiana. This would be the 4th hurricane to impact Louisiana in the past 2 years, both 2020 and now 2021 here. So please take care, and our thoughts are with you. That's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching.